So first of all, I just want to say a big thank you to Nina and to the wardens and to the PCC and others who looked after the church whilst I was away. I must admit I was greatly encouraged to come back and find that many of the issues or things that I was aware needed resolving, a lot of them had been resolved and dealt with. So I was really greatly encouraged. So a big thank you to everyone, but especially Nina and the wardens. Nina's not feeling very well tonight, so that's why she's not with us, but a big thank you to them. Also, I must say a very big thank you to Beata, because I couldn't go away on sabbatical and spend so long away from home were it not for Beata's blessing and encouragement for me to do this, especially as she had work to do and Tomek and Adam had GCSE and A-levels to do. So I was away for just over 3 months on sabbatical, and a sabbatical is not a holiday. It's meant to be a time of refreshment and rest, both physically, mentally and spiritually. And I quite like that quote there on the screen. A pastor's sabbatical is time away from the church to reconnect with God and rediscover God's purposes for their life. Now, I did a number of things over my sabbatical, but the main thing I did was walking the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And I spent 7 weeks in Spain doing the Camino. And the Camino de Santiago, or Way of St. James in English, is a network of ancient pilgrimage paths from all across Europe that converge on the Galician city in northwest Spain of Santiago de Compostela. And tradition records that the apostle St. James is buried in the cathedral at Santiago de Compostela. Now, according to Spanish legend, St. James, the son of Zebedee and brother to the apostle John, so one of Jesus' disciples, preached the gospel in Galatia, in northwest Spain. And then he returned to Judea, and in AD 44, he was beheaded under the orders of Herod Agrippa. Now, according to Spanish legend, after his death, his disciples brought his body back to Spain on a boat led by angels. Now, I think the boat was made out of stone, so make of that of what you wish. But his body, according to the tradition, to legend, was brought back to Spain, and he was buried in what is now Santiago de Compostela. And his body was discovered in the 9th century by a shepherd boy. And King Alfonso II had a small chapel built over the place where his bones were buried. And it became a very important place of pilgrimage. Now, as you might guess, I'm slightly skeptical of the claim that St. James is actually buried in Santiago de Compostela. I think it's possible that there is some Christian saint, and there are some Christian saints that were active in that part of the world that might have been buried there, but I'm a little bit skeptical about the claim that it's actually the apostle St. James. But the Camino became this really important pilgrimage route, particularly from the Middle Ages onwards. And the pilgrimage to Camino, along with pilgrimages to Rome and Jerusalem, they were the 3 main pilgrimages in the medieval period. And many people would do the pilgrimage as an act of penance so that they could secure a plenary indulgence, that is, time off purgatory. And surprisingly, if you do the Camino to this day, especially in a holy year, which this year is considered a holy year, you can have a plenary indulgence. So it's still a practice, a doctrine by the Catholic Church. Now, again, I don't believe in plenary indulgences, but that's what people do. And from the 14th century onwards, partly because of religious wars, and then the plague, and then the Reformation, overall interest in the Camino started to wane, to the extent that it was almost forgotten about. But anyway, on there you've got a map of a part of Europe, and you can see all the different routes that lead to Santiago in northwest Spain. And towards the end of my sabbatical, I went to Poland, spent time with Beata's family in Poland. And the Camino actually travels through Beata's hometown in Torun. So this is in Torun, and you can see on the wall, that's the Camino marker, the Camino symbol. So I was on the Camino path in Poland, so maybe one time I'll walk from Poland to Spain. Anyway, here are some other pictures. This is a picture of Santiago Cathedral, taken one day as I was leaving the city. And this is what you see when you go to where the remains, purportedly the remains of St. James the Apostle are kept. So you sort of go underneath into this little crypt area. And his remains, or the remains of someone, is kept in that casket. But as I say, from the 14th century, the number of people doing the Camino dropped dramatically. And in 1985, there were only 1,245 people recorded completing the pilgrimage. But since the 1990s, the Camino has seen this huge resurgence in popularity. And it's in part due to people like this chap. This is Father Elias Valnier, who in the 1980s worked tirelessly to mark the route. And he is the one that marked the route using these yellow arrows. So if you walk the Camino, you will get very familiar to seeing these yellow arrows. These are what guide and direct you. In fact, it becomes almost Pavlovian in the sense that if you see a yellow arrow, even if it's not a Camino yellow arrow, you feel like you should be following it. But it's thanks largely to his work that interest in the Camino has grown again. And you can see just the change that's happened since the 1980s. So 1985, 1,245 pilgrims completed the Camino. 2021, almost 179,000 people did the Camino. And this year, and this is the beginning of September, so this figure has changed, over 315,000 people have done the Camino this year alone, of whom 3 are myself, Julie, and Paul. Now, as I said, this year is a holy year. So when St. James Day falls on a Sunday, the feast day of St. James falls on a Sunday, that is considered a holy year. Now, I actually think it was last year that St. James Day fell on a Sunday, but because of COVID, the pandemic and so forth, which obviously had a big impact on the Camino, the Pope declared that this year would also be a holy year. And because obviously cases of COVID have dropped, lots of people have done the Camino this year, hence the huge numbers. So you can see that the Camino has become very popular. And the symbol of the Camino is the scallop shell. And as you're walking along the path, you will see lots of people will have these shells tied to the back of their backpacks. I didn't bother doing that, but many do. And the reason the scallop shell is a symbol of the Camino is because when pilgrims used to walk the Camino, they would get to Santiago and then they would carry on a few more days and reach the Atlantic coast, and they would go to the shore and they would pick a scallop shell. And that was a sign, a symbol that they had completed the Camino. So the Camino, the symbol of the Camino, is a scallop shell. And you will notice, if you look carefully, you'll see it actually in later slides, that the symbol of the Camino is a stylized version of that scallop shell. And the idea is it's all the different paths converging on the one point, which is Santiago to Compostela. So here I am on the path, and you can see the route is splitting here, and this is actually towards the end of the Camino. So lots of people walk to Santiago de Compostela, but you can walk beyond Santiago, which is what I did. And you can go to either Mucha or Finisterre. Now, if you've ever watched the film The Way, which stars Martin Sheen, which is about someone walking the Camino, he finishes his journey in Mucha. I actually walked first to Mucha, which is the path on the right, and then from Mucha to Finisterre, and then actually from Finisterre back to Santiago. So you can see the yellow arrows, and you can see the Camino symbol there on the path. Now, people do the Camino for all sorts of reasons. Now, you might assume that most people do it because for religious reasons, but actually that's not true. In fact, I would say anecdotally from the conversations I had, the vast majority of people I met doing the Camino weren't doing it for religious reasons at all. But when you complete the Camino, you go to the pilgrim's office. If you've done enough journey, you are awarded a Compostela, which is a certificate of the Camino, this is mine here. Paul and Julie will have their own. It also has, I think they put your name in Latin as well somewhere. It tells you how far you've walked. But when you do that, they also record why did you do the Camino. And this is the statistics from 2021. So 36% said they did it for religious reasons, 43% said they did it for religious and other, and 20% said they did it for non-religious. But I would say, just from my experience, is that some people obviously do it for religious reasons. A lot of people do it because they just want space to reflect. It gives them time to step away from their ordinary lives and process and think things through. And some people do it simply because of the physical challenge. It's a long distance hike, if you want to see it like that, through a very beautiful part of Spain or northern Spain, through many historic cities. So some people just do it because it's there, it's a physical challenge. And the Camino is truly international. Again, last year, obviously we only have full statistics for last year, people from 168 nationalities walked the Camino. So 168 different nationalities did the Camino last year, which is extraordinary. And I particularly noticed when I was doing it that we had a lot of people from Canada, from the United States of America, and from South Korea doing the Camino. A lot of people from North America and South Korea, as well as lots of people from France, Spain, and Italy, but also lots of other countries as well. And the people who do the Camino come from all sorts of backgrounds, all ages. So I saw school children walking the Camino, even young children with their parents, and people right through to their 80s. In fact, I met a man, you'll see him later, who had just celebrated his 80th birthday. And I had a meal with him one night, and then the next day, as I was walking along the path, he passed me, and he was going at a rate of knots, and I couldn't catch up with him. And you find people of different fitnesses. Some people are clearly very fit. Some people, it looks like they've never walked in their life. Some people do it by themselves. Some do it as couples. Some do it as part of a group. So you see, every aspect of life, gender, age represented. Now, there are different routes that you can do to Santiago, but the most famous and the most popular is the route called the Camino Francis. And this is the one that I did. And it starts in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in France, crosses over the Pyrenees, and 800 kilometers later, you reach Santiago. And this is probably the best known and the most famous of the routes. It goes through many historic cities such as Pamplona, Leon, Burgos, as well as ancient medieval villages and different regions of Spain. So from the Pyrenean Mountains to the vineyards of the Rioja region, to the hot, dry, flat plains of the Meseta, and then to the rolling woodland of Galicia, and eventually reaching the Atlantic Ocean. So there are a few pictures here. I'm sure you'll recognize those other people there with me. And this is the first day of walking the Camino. That's why we're smiling. And this was walking up to the Pyrenees. It hadn't started raining at this point. It did not long after that photo was taken. But this is sort of fairly typical scenery that you'll find on the Camino. Sometimes you're walking along roads or along tarmac paths, but often you're walking along routes like this. This is a picture walking in the Meseta. So that's me in the middle wearing the red t-shirt. And the Meseta is a very large plain in the north of Spain, and it's considered by many to be the hardest part of the Camino because you have these long stretches where there's very little in the way of provision, very few towns or villages, there's very little shade, and it's very hot. So another picture, that was a sunrise on the Meseta. And this is a picture, this is a friend of mine called Billy. I'll mention more about him a bit later. But this is Billy walking close to Santiago. This is sort of on the way into Santiago, and maybe a day or two before we reach there. And then once you go beyond Santiago, if you do go beyond Santiago, you reach the Atlantic Ocean and these beautiful coastline. And this was actually taken when I walked from Mucha down to Finisterre. Absolutely stunning coastal scenery. And they do say that the Camino has 3 different parts to it. They say that there is the physical challenge, which is the first third. The second third is the mental challenge, and the third third is the spiritual challenge. So the physical challenge is, of course, the first part, and that's where people are just getting used to walking every single day. People start the Camino at different parts, but if you start, as we did in St. Jean-Pied-de-Port, you've got the Pyrenees to climb over, which in itself wasn't too difficult. The weather wasn't very good for us, so that made it a bit harder. But you have the physical challenge. The mental challenge is the Meseta. That's why some people actually skip the Meseta. I thought the Meseta was beautiful. I loved it. It's one of my favorite parts of the Camino. But a lot of people find it very challenging because you have these very, very, very long stretches. It can be incredibly hot. You're walking in temperatures of over 30 degrees, and mentally it can be hard. And spiritually, I think as people get towards Santiago, and you get towards your destination, you have all these sorts of emotions going on in your body. A sense of excitement about reaching Santiago, but also often a deep sense of sadness that your journey is coming to an end, and the friendships and relationships you've built on the route, you realize that you're going to be saying goodbye to lots of people. And this is a picture of me actually in Finisterre, and that marker there is the 0 kilometer marker. So a lot of people, if they can't walk to Finisterre, will get the bus to Finisterre and have their photo taken there. But for me, it was important to walk all the way. So in terms of staying on the Camino, you stay in albergues, pilgrims' hostels. Now, I was going to bring my pilgrim's passport, and I forgot to bring it. But you have a pilgrim's passport, and you can see it on there. So each place you stay at night, you get it stamped as a record of the fact that you stayed there. And it also gives you entitlement to stay in these albergues. The smaller photo above the pilgrim's passport is Billy, where he was getting a special stamp. We both got it actually, which was a wax stamp. So most of the stamps are just ink stamps, but we managed to get a wax one as well. And there's a crowd of people waiting to get into an albergue. And albergues are just pilgrims' hostels, very basic, very simple, most of them, although I must admit that one actually had a swimming pool, which was a bonus. And they're very cheap. You're paying about 12 to 15 euros typically to stay there a night, and you're staying in these large dormitories. They vary in size. Some of the bigger ones can have over 100 beds, but you'll be often sharing with 30, 40, 50 people in a room. Now, there were lots of amazing places that I stayed in, but this, I think, was probably the most interesting. The house looks like it should be from Star Wars, in my opinion, the design. But this was on the Meseta, and it's a place called Sant Bol, and it was in the middle of nowhere. It was miles from any place around. There were only 12 beds in this place. We were welcomed there. I think I was the first person there by the hospitalier, the man that would welcome us. He cooked this meal of paella, and then after the meal has finished, he decided to entertain us. And it transpired that he was from Cuba and is a professional musician. Now, at this point, Matthew, are you able to put on that video? Because I've just recorded a bit of that meal. So if we can see if Matthew can put that on, that would be great. Thank you. So if we could go back to the other slide. Wonderful, thank you. So yeah, that was one of the most memorable nights on the whole Camino. Each of the places we stayed were all different and all interesting. In terms of food on the Camino, food is very basic and very simple. I tended to eat in the restaurants because a lot of restaurants do what they call pilgrim menus. And again, for 12 to 15 euros, you get a 3-course meal, a mixed salad to start with, a main course and a dessert with bread and wine and thrown in as well. And it was really good value, and it was often cheaper than actually going out and finding your own food and cooking your own food. That was assuming these places even had a place to cook in. Some hostels, some albergues have places where you can cook, some don't. And the routine of the Camino is very, very simple. It can be summed up like this: walk, eat, sleep, repeat. It was a very simple routine, which I really loved. So typically, I would get up between 5:30 in the morning. Sometimes I got up earlier, and I would walk for several hours. And the reason you get up so early, and it's not just me, it's lots of people doing this, is because you need to beat the heat. It gets too hot if you leave it too late. So I'd get up early, walk a couple hours, stop for breakfast, and then carry on walking, usually to my destination, which would be about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You get in, you book in, you pay your nightly fee, you get a shower, you wash your clothes, you get some food, and then you go to bed, again, usually about 9 o'clock, and you sleep, and then you repeat and do it. And it was a very simple routine. Now, I should warn you, as some of you will have seen this picture before, but some of you might not like this picture, because I mentioned that everyone on the Camino will suffer some challenges, and everyone will experience some physical challenges, and blisters is a big issue that many people face, including me. And a lot of people, when I got back, said, "We've seen your blisters," or "How are your blisters? We've been praying for your feet." I thought I had done everything right to avoid having blisters, but I was wrong. I must have damaged my feet within the first day or two, and I developed these blisters, and I was trying to treat them, and it didn't matter what I was doing to treat them, they were just getting worse and worse, to the extent that I thought the blister will end up covering my whole foot. I was with Paul and Julie through this time. They can tell you what it was like. But after I left them, for the first day I walked by myself when I left them, so I've been with them walking for about 7 days. I got to my destination, I was in so much pain, the agony was unbearable. I ended up going to the local hospital, and when they took off the bandages and they looked at my feet, even they seemed shocked, and I thought, well, they must be used to seeing people with blisters all the time, so they must be pretty bad. And I actually wrote this in my diary. So today I was meant to be walking from Najarera to Santo Domingo, but instead I'm spending the day in Najarera to allow my feet to rest. It's deeply frustrating. I want to be walking and making my way to Santiago, and I want to be there by the end of June. But that deadline is slipping. But what is worse is I'm worried my feet won't heal enough for me to continue. I've dreamt about doing the Camino for such a long time, but right now that dream feels like it's hanging in the balance. And I actually spent 2 nights in a hostel there, and then after the second night in the hostel, I decided to book myself into an Airbnb. And I really did seriously give consideration about stopping the Camino, going away for a week or so, because I had some other contacts in Spain, and then joining the Camino later. But I booked myself into an Airbnb, and the next night I wrote this: I find the idea of not going anywhere or doing anything quite challenging. I'm not good at just being. To me, it almost feels like wasted time. Maybe this is one of the lessons I need to learn. And the big frustration about the Camino is I was sitting there watching people coming through, carrying on their journey, and I wanted to be with them. The other frustration was I had met a number of people on the path, and I wanted to continue the journey with them, but I couldn't because I had to wait. Now, fortunately, after 4 days, my feet were in a better, and I was able to continue the journey, and they did, although it's still painful, they did heal over time, and fortunately, I was able to complete the Camino. So what are the highlights of the Camino? I want to highlight a number of things that, for me, were important, and also the spiritual dimension. Oh. You don't like my feet? For you, Sue, highlights of the Camino. So some of you know I was in New Zealand for a year, a long time ago, before I was ordained. And when I left New Zealand, the person I worked for gave me a book. And in the book, he inscribed this Maori proverb. And the Maori proverb is this: what is the most important thing in the world? It is the people, it is the people, it is the people. And for me, what made the Camino and makes the Camino so special is the people you meet along the way. I met lots of amazing, wonderful people. And these are just some here. So I mentioned the chap who just celebrated his 80th birthday. He's the person sat to my left. The chap on my right is Robert. He's from Wales. We've got people from North America, Hong Kong. The couple on the right hand of the screen were a lovely Christian couple. This was their honeymoon, which I think had been postponed from the year before. But you meet all sorts of amazing and wonderful people. Again, some other people here. I mentioned Sambol being an amazing albergue. This place we stayed at, we had an amazing night. The lady second from the left in the turquoise top is the owner of the albergue, and all the restaurants, everything was closed, no shops were open. But the restaurants were closed. And she said, well, go to the local shop and buy a steak from there, because she said the steak that they sell in that shop came from the cow that was in the field right in front of the hostel. And then she proceeded to cook it for us. It's so simple and one of the best steaks I've ever tasted. Then they brought out the homemade wine and the homemade, I think they called it Galician firewater, which is a very strong spirit. And we had, again, a lot of fun there. And this is a group of people I sort of walked with and bonded with on the Camino, and this is obviously in Santiago. But I just want to mention a couple of people in particular. The first one is this chap on the right, and his name is Billy. And I met Billy shortly after leaving Julie and Paul, actually, and we sort of bumped into one another. And we kept bumping into each other as we were staying in different hostels, and we got chatting. And we actually struck up quite a close friendship, and we ended up walking together for over 3 weeks on the Camino and staying together. And Billy was a really key part of my Camino experience, and had a wonderful time with him. But the thing about the Camino is that the Camino is a leveler, because you don't really know much about people's backgrounds. And I found that, generally speaking, people didn't ask, what do you do for a living? But people did share on a very deep and personal level. And Billy and I had some amazing conversations. If you met him, he's a lovely guy, very positive and upbeat, but he's actually experienced quite a lot of personal loss in his own life. When I found out about it, I was quite surprised. But this is what I wrote in my diary on day 31. Today, Billy and I talked about death and dying. There is something about walking the Camino that enables people to have conversations that they may not otherwise have. It's one of the things that makes this journey so special. So I found that you were sharing with people on a really deep level, probably at a level for people I've known for years and years and years, maybe much of my life, I've probably not had conversations as deep as I did with some of the people I met on the Camino. And it's something about walking with people, I think, enables you to do that. The other person I want to mention is the guy in the middle, and his name is Andy. But he's also known as the Camino Ninja. And a lot of people, when they walk the Camino, have an app on their phone. And Andy developed an app called the Camino Ninja app, which was invaluable. I used it all the time. And Andy was from Denmark, and he'd spent the last 15 years walking the Camino. He'd walked over 20,000 kilometers. And if you walk the Camino, he became a bit of a legend. It felt like we were journeying with him. Because we relied so much on his app. And he was a programmer, and when he first did the Camino, he developed his app because it was the app he wished had existed when he started walking the Camino. And Billy and I were in Lyon. We were sat in a restaurant one night, and I saw Andy, didn't know he was called Andy, but the Camino Ninja walking past. As you can see, a very distinctive looking man. So someone that we were with ran over and said, do you want to come and sit with us? And he sat with us a couple of hours, just chatting about the Camino, answering our questions. And we probably bombarding him with questions that he'd answered thousands and thousands of times. But he was just so willing to share his love and his passion of the Camino with us. And the reason I mention him is because 4 weeks after that photo was taken, I had a message from Billy to say, have you heard the news about Andy? And 4 weeks after that photo was taken, or even less than 4 weeks, he was walking through the city of Lyon and he just collapsed and dropped dead. And he was only 49 years old. And that actually really affected me, actually. I was really moved and really upset about that. And some of you know I kept videos, put videos on YouTube, and I actually did a video in commemoration of Andy. Someone wrote this, I wrote this in my diary. You meet people, sometimes frequently over the course of a few days, but then you may not see them again, depending on their own schedule and where they stay. One of the people I met today described the Camino like a game of hopscotch, where you keep meeting people at different points in the walk. So the big thing about the Camino is the people you meet. And there's another one of Billy. The other important lesson is the importance of traveling lightly. So I took this rucksack with me. Everything was packed into there. And actually, I thought I packed really well. In fact, I think I probably did pack pretty well. But I shed quite a bit of stuff that I was carrying with me and sent it home. And I realized that actually I needed very little to survive in order to do the Camino. So I ended up with just things like 2 t-shirts, 2 pairs of underpants, traveling as lightly as possible. And you just wash a t-shirt and then you dry overnight and you'd have a new one the next day. But it made me think about the things we carry with us in life and how cluttered our lives can be, both physically but also spiritually. And again, this is what I wrote in my diary. The simplicity of the Camino is one of the most beautiful things about it. No emails to worry about or phone calls to make, just getting up first thing in the morning and walking, carrying your possessions in a rucksack, stopping for breakfast at a cafe, watching the sunrise, listening to music, chatting to people on the way, and taking in the beauty of creation. And on day 18, I was having a nightmare with the rucksack. I just couldn't get it comfortable. And this is what I wrote. I've been reflecting on the struggles I've had with the burden I was carrying today and how no amount of fiddling with the backpack could correct it. And it's made me think about the burdens others carry: ill health, disability, loneliness, isolation, singleness, unhappy marriages, financial worries, those trapped in unfulfilling jobs, unemployment, the list goes on. I took a moment to pray for these people. I have been thinking seriously about sending some items home to try and reduce the weight of my rucksack. I actually need very little for this pilgrimage. Again, there is something to ponder about the unnecessary things we carry with us through life. What might I be asked to lay down? The words of Jesus are apt. Are you tired, worn out on religion? Come to me, get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I don't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. And at the convent of St. Anton, I came across this wonderful quote, which I took a photo of because it spoke to me. It won't be that clear on that image, but it says this: I asked to be rich, to achieve happiness, and was given poverty to become wise. I asked for all things in order to enjoy life and was given life in order to enjoy all things. I received nothing of what I was asked for, but was given everything I dreamed of. So an important lesson about the Camino is learning to travel light, not just on the Camino, but actually through life as well. Another important place was this place. It's the Cruz de Ferro, or the Iron Cross. And this is actually the highest point on the Camino, not the Pyrenees, but this place. And it's a place where for hundreds and hundreds of years, pilgrims have been leaving stones or pebbles that they've carried with them. So I had a pebble from the bay here in Denton Home, which I carried with me all the way. And traditionally, pilgrims leave the pebble at the foot of the cross as a sign of symbolically laying down their burdens at the cross. And again, that was an important stop for me. We'd stopped not far from it, and we were coming up early in the morning. The sun is rising. It was very misty, and you came to this place, and it really was very special. And I spent time just praying, particularly actually for people in the church that I was aware of and issues that were going on in people's lives. So that, again, was an important place. And again, an important idea about what things do we carry that we need to lay down and give to Jesus. The other reflection was about travel as a metaphor for the Christian life. So before Christians or followers of Jesus were called Christians, they were called people of the way. And this is what I wrote on day 13. I have been reflecting on the name of the Camino, which is the way of St. James, and the Christians called to be people of the way, a people of pilgrimage. The whole idea of a pilgrimage is that you don't stay in one place long, but keep moving. This is one of the things I'm enjoying about the Camino. Each morning I get up and set off for a new destination. However, in the Christian life, we often stop journeying and get comfortable with where we are. I wonder if that is true of me. So, the idea of travel and pilgrimage as being part of something we're called to throughout our Christian lives. And in fact, they talk about the Camino. The Camino doesn't end when you finish the Camino. It's something that we're on constantly. The other thing that really spoke to me is about being immersed in the beauty of creation and learning to read the second book of God and learning to live in the moment. So Psalm 19 says this: "The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands." And Christians in the Middle Ages talked about there being two books, or God's two books, in terms of how God makes himself known to us. So the first and primary book is, of course, Scripture, God's special revelation to us. But the second book is the book of nature, the beauty of creation. And St. Francis Bacon wrote this: "God has, in fact, written two books, not just one. Of course, we're all familiar with the first book he wrote, namely Scripture. But he has written a second book called Creation." And Paul in Romans chapter 1 verse 2 said, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." So it's this idea that we can see and discover something of God in the beauty of the world that he has made. And for me, just being out in the beauty of creation, spending most of my time outside in northern Spain, which is stunningly beautiful, far more beautiful than I thought it would be, was really special. I was particularly fortunate in that I was walking at the end of May, beginning of June, where there were so many wildflowers out, and the wildflowers were just breathtaking. For mile after mile, you'd be walking along these verges with all these beautiful wildflowers growing. And it was just awe-inspiring to be in God's creation and just to try and learn to live in the moment. Again, as I was walking along the Meseta, I wrote this in my diary: "As I was walking by myself today, I have been reflecting on the trees. There is as much of the tree hidden from view, the roots, as what we can see on display. It has made me reflect on what I show to the world and how deep my roots are in terms of my own relationship with God." So when we look at creation, creation can reflect back to us and speak to us about ourselves, but also about God who made it. And the other thing is about learning to take each day as it comes, learning to live in the moment. Now, I was one of these people, I like to have everything planned well in advance, to know where I'd be staying, where I'd be eating, and so forth. But on the Camino, I actually learned to just trust that and take each day as it came. So when Julie and Paul and I went out, we booked the first 2 nights accommodation, and then we would tend to book a day ahead. And I did that occasionally. I'll book a day ahead depending where I was. But quite often, and particularly as I went on the Camino, I wouldn't book anywhere at all. I would just reach my destination and trust that I would find somewhere to stay and just to live in the moment. And actually, there's something really quite liberating about that. The other thing is about learning not to get frustrated by circumstances. So one of the lessons I had to learn very quickly, and Paul had to learn very quickly, was not to get irritated with people who snore, and learning to love one another, and learning to be patient with one another, and so forth. So the Camino really was and is an amazing experience. This is just a picture, again, of a few of the people that I was with in Santiago. Billy there next to me, Eve from Hong Kong, Joe, who's from the States, and Maria, who's a German girl who we met actually on the final day as we walked into Santiago. But the Camino, I would say, is a life-changing experience, and I really didn't want the journey to end. And the journey was different. Walking with Paul and Julie was very different. When I was by myself, it's different, because when you're with people you tend to stay with them, stick with them, eat with them. And although we've talked to other people, you have your little group. When you're by yourself, you're forced to interact more with other people. And when I left Santiago and did the last section by myself, it's very different because it's much quieter. The section into Santiago is very, very busy. But the section from Santiago onwards, not as many people do it. And that was just a special time, just being by myself. But I want to finish with a pilgrim's prayer that I came across. And this relates really to the Camino and walking the Camino. But actually, I think it's something that we can relate to in our lives as well. And then when we finish this, we'll continue with some more worship and then draw our service to a close. But this is the pilgrim's prayer. Although I may have traveled all the roads, crossed mountains and valleys from east to west, if I have not discovered the freedom to be myself, I have arrived nowhere. Although I may have shared all my possessions with people of other languages and cultures, made friends with pilgrims of 1,000 paths, or shared albergues with saints and princes, if I am not capable of forgiving my neighbor tomorrow, I have arrived nowhere. Although I may have carried my pack from beginning to end and waited for every pilgrim in need of encouragement, or given my bed to the one who arrived later than I, given my bottle of water in exchange for nothing, if upon returning to my home and work, I am not able to create brotherhood or make happiness, peace, and unity, I have arrived nowhere. Although I may have had food and water each day and enjoyed a roof and shower every night, or may have had my injuries well attended, if I had not discovered in all that the love of God, I have arrived nowhere. Although I may have seen all the monuments and contemplated the best sunsets, although I may have learned a greeting in every language or tasted the clean water from every fountain, if I have not discovered who is the author of so much free beauty and so much peace, I have arrived nowhere. If from today I do not continue walking on your path, searching and living according to what I have learned, if from today I do not see in every person, friend or foe, a companion on the Camino, if from today I cannot recognize God, the God of Jesus of Nazareth, as the one God of my life, I have arrived nowhere. I'll just put these questions up. I'm not going to ask us to think about them now, but maybe you might want to look at them a little bit later. And I actually can't see them that clearly. I'm going to have to come down here. So just a few questions to ponder. And I think what I'll do, when we serve refreshments, I'll ask Matthew to put these back on the screen. So if you want to chat about them with one another afterwards over coffee, feel free to do so. But the questions are, if you could go on pilgrimage, where would you go and why? Are there any burdens you are carrying that you feel God is inviting you to lay down? How can we learn to live more simply and freely? Are we too settled in our lives as Christians? And what can we do about this? And the Maori say the most important thing in the world is people. How can we prioritize relationships with those around us? So maybe just some questions for you to ponder, particularly at the end of the service.